Hello, hello, y'all. As we prepare our live stream to YouTube, and you can follow us by looking up Writer's Lunch on YouTube. We are happy to welcome you to Writer's Lunch today. Very happy to have Shannon Winton here to talk about Kindle mistakes that self-published authors make. And this is something that can help everybody because keywords are so important in so many ways that, heck, if you find yourself getting traditionally published, you will end up doing a lot of the legwork yourself. And so keywords, different ways of describing things are super important, absolutely. Oh my, Shannon, so happy to have you here today to talk about this. But before we get to you, and as you set up your sharing for your PowerPoint, I will also bring up that next week we're going to have Bookseller AMA with 3 local Houston booksellers. And so bring your questions. What do you want to ask my booksellers about when they see books on shelves? What works, what doesn't? Well, how trends happen, how trends grow and fade. And it's going to be the hands-on parts, and today we'll look at the very digital part of what works and what doesn't in kind of like the retail environment we live in. We're forced to do what we have to do, you know.
Yep. And I'm not going to go, like, we will talk about keywords, but there are even more basic mistakes that I tend to see a lot, especially with new authors. And I'm not calling anybody out. This is all super hard stuff. So when we go through this, don't feel like it's about any particular person. This is just really difficult things. Turning story into copy, turning, your ideas into something that's marketable, turning, what you wrote into a 3 sentence summary. That's ridiculously hard. Like, we're not taught how to do that. And the skills that make us good writers for fiction and even for nonfiction aren't necessarily the same things that teach us what other people need to hear to be interested. So there are ways that people accidentally tell prospective readers to, don't buy the book by accident. And so this is just kind of an overview of some common things that I see, especially when I'm doing market reviews, or on the occasion that I do a listing review, as an as an editor, even though that's not generally speaking part of editing, that I see. So just a little bit about me. I am Shannon Winton. I'm the co-founder of Houston Independent Authors and Writers Lunch, along with Sean. I'm the coordinator for the Houston chapter of the Editorial Freelancers Association. I teach for the EFA quite a bit. I've actually taught a few of the one-off courses for them, but I'm currently running the editing science fiction and fantasy 6-week course for the EFA, meaning I'm teaching other editors how to edit. I'm also the coordinator here in Houston for the Houston Science Fiction and Fantasy Meetup Group, and along with Sean and a lot of other lovely people, I am the co-founder of the Tomeworks Editing Collective. All right, so let's talk first about, before anybody even gets to your page, how do you even know if somebody is going to your listing? Like, you can make all sorts of changes to your listing, but if nobody is going to the listing in the first place, it doesn't matter what you do. So Kindle or Amazon makes it really hard to see the number of people who actually visit the listing and then decide not to buy it, or the number of people who visit the listing and you can see the number of sales, but you don't know how long it's sat in the cart. You don't know if somebody like Dally put your book in the cart, decided not to buy it. Like, there's all sorts of things that you could know with analytics, but Amazon doesn't give you. So there's a few easy shortcuts that don't require you to have a crap ton of marketing experience, that are probably tools that you have access to and maybe you just have never looked at. So what I'm showing you right here is just my Bitly analytics for, this is all honesty, for a baby registry, but I thought it worked really well because if you ever make QR codes for your book and hand out stuff that's QR coded to, prospective buyers in real life, you can see how many times somebody has scanned that. So if you're doing a QR code to send somebody to the listing to buy your book, how many times did that actually get scanned, and did that translate into sales? You can see how many people have actually clicked on the links if you're going to use a shortener or a go-between link between your website, or a link that you put on Facebook and you just like drop into a comment or what have you, and if that actually translated into people going to your Amazon listing. So you can see how much engagement there was, how much has happened recently, and then if you're seeing trends essentially. And this is just if you have a Bitly. Now you can do the same kind of thing if you do a BookBub ad. You can see how many people who are interested clicked on it, didn't actually like go through and download the book. You can do this with your newsletters. MailerLite, MailChimp, they all have information. So if you put links inside of your newsletter, you can see who, not who, actually, I know MailerLite does who, but you can see how many people have actually clicked the link. And did that translate into sales? Again,
Shannon, if I
Bitly.
can butt in and say, Roma, so each one of these suggestions so far, these are all paid, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, these are all free. Yay.
Yeah, I mean, you can do paid versions of all of these things, but my Bitly subscription information, or my Bitly, is all free. BookBub is paid. You are correct there. But if you run a newsletter, depending on your size, almost every place has the very simple, like who clicked on what, um, even with free accounts. So I'm going to show you the next slide a little bit more. That's one of our newsletters. It shows you a bunch of stuff. We have a free account. You can also use Google Analytics, or if you have analytics through your web host for your website, most of the time they will show you things like links clicked, how long somebody stayed on the page, et cetera, on your website. But then also, if you have external links, it'll show you what links were clicked to those external links too. So all of these things, if you already have them in play, use them. Figure out how to use them so that hey, is anybody actually going to my site? Is anybody engaging with my content? So over here, this is a MailerLite. Um, I can't remember which. I run a lot of newsletters. I don't remember which one this is. But basically for this one particular thing, I had people click to like my links 5% of the time. And between opening and going through, I have a pretty high CTR. What that basically means is that people open the newsletter and they actually do things inside of that email, or they engage with the email by like scrolling through or clicking on something really well. I didn't put it in here, but you can see what links people click on in a different part of this like section for MailerLite. But MailChimp, there's a bunch of others. They all have very similar things where you can see, hey, did somebody follow that link? And if that link is into your listing, then they actually laid eyes on it. And have you seen an uptick in sales? And if the answer is no, it means something is wrong on your listing itself, and that you need to figure out what it is. So that's why I bring this up, because before you even, want to go fiddle around and mess with things, you need to figure out if the listing is the real problem. It could be your marketing. It could be that, who you're trying to sell to are already people who have bought the book. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your listing. It means that your other marketing stuff might need to change. So that all said, let's talk about book covers. This can be very contentious. It can be very hard. Book covers are expensive. Doing it yourself is a pain in the ass. There are specific elements that we expect to see in what looks like a polished book cover that works for your genre. And of course, these things are very broad that I have on here, but I'm going to show you why they are important and how they can impact people's interest in your book. So when you have a book cover, you want to make sure that you have both, your text and your artistic elements, and that everything is kind of seamless, that it looks polished. What a book cover looks like for a genre that I write in, say zombie comedy, is going to be very different than, say, a divinity story. You would expect to have very different book covers, but the genre itself should be clear from that book cover, even if it's something very basic, as in, oh, this is very clearly some sort of fiction and it has speculative elements, versus, oh, this is nonfiction and it's about math, right? The book covers will be very different. And so one of the other things that you need to make sure of is when you're designing the book or you're looking at a design that you're thinking about buying, can you see these elements? Can you read that title both in full size and as a thumbnail? Because most of the time, if somebody is scrolling around, the Amazon Kindle store or what have you, or they're on their phone, they're going to see your book cover first as a thumbnail. And so if your thumbnail book cover is confusing, if they can't read it, if they can't figure out what the visuals are, basically if they can't get cues as a thumbnail, you're going to have a really hard time being like, "Oh yeah, I want to look at that more. I'm interested because of the visuals," because they're going to be like, "Oh, it's a blur."
Shannon, I'm going to throw this out there because as someone who studied graphic design, this is so different. All my the thumbnail thing, because what book covers used to look like were meant to be seen from, like 2 feet away, 6 inches away, something like that. And you could be much more detailed. So even if you love those classic ones and stuff, you have to realize that it's being presented in a different context. And even if you only read books that you buy at a bookstore and that you see, like in person, if you're trying to sell books, you have to consider everybody. A little example as well. I love to write in chalk at work for the signs. And if I write the name of a dish in cursive, that means 30 to 50% of people cannot read it. It's terribly interesting. It is not usual that you think that, like, oh, if I'm able to read it, everybody is. But things like color combinations, if somebody is colorblind, all my legibility from far away, there's a lot. And Shannon, I saw that you just wanted to pop onto
Yeah, I
another.
didn't put the colorblind thing on here, but that is something that is also recommended for graphic design is that you make sure that you avoid doing color combinations that are going to confuse people that are red, green, and blue colorblind.
My
Because
problem
even though,
was oh, sorry. My problem was purple chalk on a black chalkboard. And it was like some people literally could not see it at all.
yeah. And so, these are things that aren't even, you haven't even decided what to put on there yet. And you could be making significant mistakes because it's just not something that you've had to consider before. And then even you, Sean, with a graphic designer, excuse me, with an art degree, there are things that are new and changing simply because we engage with books through technology that are very different. And I don't know if Anna has come in yet, but I mean, she was so annoyed at the change in the artistry, for fantasy and science fiction from like the 2000s. But this is why, because if everything small looks blurry, people are less likely to buy the book. So it sucks in some ways, but at the same time, like, you have to think about this because the way the world works changed over the course of time, and these are evolutions that we also have to make with it, and it can be significantly difficult if you've never had to like figure out what works for a book cover. So again, new authors tend to have a much harder time than people who have been in the industry for a long time because they don't know what the trends are, and it's easy to make mistakes, and it's not really fair that the world works that way. All right, so your text, regardless of what kind of font you're using, should be readable. They should set an appropriate tone. So, for instance, if you're writing a book about grief, you certainly wouldn't want to use Comic Sans, right? You want to make sure that the text, works for the content of whatever that book is. And generally speaking, there's going to be some sort of integration. You want it to look like it exists together and not something where the graphic was made in one space and the text was made in another and then just stamped on top. You want to avoid things like clip art, visual elements that don't flow with the overall piece, and there should be some strong contrast. A book cover that is all black, which I think Cormac McCarthy's The Road is just black, if I remember correctly. That really doesn't fly to sell the book anymore. I would go ahead and suggest avoiding AI art, and not necessarily for the reason you might think. I mean, I don't like AI myself, but I do know there are a number of people who will refuse to buy a book if it's very clearly AI. They will just simply be like, nah, I don't need it. And so you put yourself in a situation where you may decide because you use AI to push readers away because it's an issue of contention. And avoid using artwork you don't own. Just because you find something on Google and you can't find an artist does not mean that it is Creative Commons or that you can utilize it. This can get you in some big legal trouble. And if somehow you make it big with stolen art, they can sue you and take some of your money away.
And even if
And
you
then
think, oh, how are they going to find me? If an artist reverse searches their own image, then they can find anywhere on the internet that it is posted somewhere else.
yeah, this wasn't recent, but the band Vampire Weekend accidentally used a model, like a photo shoot model's pictures that were not open, and she didn't receive any of the money from them. She sued them about 15 years later. This was back in the 2000s, and they ended up losing like millions to her. So, yeah, don't do it. If you become famous, then you will have to pay. If you don't become famous, maybe there won't be a big deal, but it's still not ethical. Avoid using free elements if you can that you've already seen on covers in your genre. This kind of sucks, but there's only so many free things to go around, or Creative Commons pictures, or things that you can find in stock photography that's free. If you've already seen an element, a particular guy, a particular, girl, a particular dog, whatever that are on other covers in your genre, then people are either going to say, "Uh-oh, you stole that idea," or they're going to be like, "Oh, I already bought this book." And they will get confused because your book cover looks too much like somebody else's. So let's break it down a little more. I just realized we have only gotten through like two things. So I may not get to everything today. We might have to do part two. All right. So this is a bad book cover. And don't worry, I made this to show off. This is not something that exists in real life. However, I designed it because I see this kind of stuff. So when you see a book cover with illegible text, if I was to make this into a much smaller picture, you certainly wouldn't be able to read it, but there are certain things that happen because the background is pale, where especially right here, loves is very difficult to, see. And it's just, it's bad composition really. There are multiple randomly like these composition elements may be really important for the story, but they don't create any sort of cohesive visual story. And Sean, can you give us a better explanation of what that means? Because I don't have the artistic ken to do so.
Um, okay, so there is pastiche, and that is kind of when you're, making fun of things and stuff like that, but you do I in general, I think about elements that have to be in balance. This does a good job of slicing it in half and having the top and the bottom. I think that it could be a good thing if in very bold letters the bottom half was I the words on there that you could read it. I But obviously in the same, white text, you can't read it from top to bottom at all. I If you're talking about kind of clip art things and stuff, I it just it relates to a time period. That's the art history way of saying it, is that this looks like someone threw it together in 2002, because it's just kind of like cobbled together. They don't look like solid elements that belong together. That is of a time period though, and if you love rap albums of the early 2000s, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's all a reference. Everything you're doing is a reference when you're doing graphic design. So it's all related to a certain art period, yada yada. That might answer the question. It might not, but I do love as well, Shannon, that I'm looking at this on my computer, looking at your presentation, and so it's very small. And versus looking at this full screen or something like that, I can imagine if you're at Writer's Lunch right now on your phone, it's even smaller, which would actually be the thumbnail size. And in that case, you do have green at the bottom and a little bit of a blur. Maybe you can tell that there's a face on the right and a purple blob and a yellow blob on the left. But you get very, very little information from this. A large part of graphic design is, can you tell at a glance what this is supposed to do? What is it supposed to do?
Right. And so what you'll see with a lot of people who are making their own, or who just don't have the know-how to determine if a cover is good when they go to buy one, you'll see people come up with this where the backgrounds are disconnected, or there's like conflicting odds to genre. So the name He Loves Her Not sounds very personal. The Farm and the Sky often is stuff you'll see with like religious stories or inspirational stories. Um, and then, this kind of text style doesn't match the text style of the name. So this looks very much like something that would be in like a spooky story, whereas this is something that looks like it may be in like women's lit. It just doesn't fit together. And yeah, so for those who can't see it, there is a guy who's cut off at the chest. There is a purple like 80s 90s style telephone and a pile of corn. And for the story, that might be like super important somehow, but it doesn't create a like comprehensible story for the visual. And then sometimes there will be quotes that, again, like that might be really important for the story somehow, but it doesn't draw the reader in. So, when no one knows what to do, there are new places to look. Like that doesn't tell me anything about what could, like, it is inscrutable. And then we did kind of talk about the shocking edges. So Anna, I kind of feel like after I found this that you had already shown this once, but it's a huge difference between, you know, Little Women that was pulled from a stock photo of somebody who's very clearly like boho chic, that they're able to sell simply because Little Women is like in the public domain now, versus this beautifully orchestrated, like artistic piece where Little Women may not be as easy to read when it's small, but the writing and the art is gorgeously put together, right? Like there's a lot of mastery that went into creating this artistic piece and like making sure that there were elements of the story that fit into this and sort of weaving it all together. I wouldn't expect somebody who's never, made a cover to make something as beautiful as this. But if this wasn't a book that teenagers were required to read, I don't think anybody would buy this one over on the left. It looks very poor, poorly done, I should say. So when you're thinking about buying a book, when you see something that doesn't look professional, or that you don't really have a thought about it because it doesn't make a lot of sense to begin with, like this one over here, it can turn readers off. So that is usually the very first thing a reader sees, either because they're scrolling through or because they followed your link. And if this is what's meeting them, something that is simply confusing instead of evocative, then you may lose that reader at that potential sell. All right. So let's go into blurb and book description mistakes. So a lot of times people have a hard time writing their sales copy. And these are some common issues that you'll find. They will describe complications instead of providing hooks. Um, it will have vague descriptions of the character or what makes them unique. There is just too much detail or summary instead of sales copy. They fail to highlight intriguing elements of the story, like what makes this story different than other stories in the same genre. And then they'll name drop incorrectly. This one can get really, really iffy because a lot of times Kindle will not let you use other authors' names. Occasionally people get away with it, but you are not, you're really not supposed to do anything that may associate you without authority to a more successful author. So that in itself can get your listing taken down. Or, if you're complaining about other authors' books, you just sound like kind of a coot. People don't want to read what you have to say, especially if they like that author. And then you're also not supposed to use review quotes to begin with in this section, especially not from your audience. So we can talk about the blurbs from other authors because if we actually will talk about this. So I'm going to hold this because there is a space for this kind of stuff. And it's one of those things that's kind of not fair. But if it's a big name author, you can get away with putting their blurb right here in the summary. And if it's not a big name author, you may not be able to. But there is a space specifically for blurbs and reviews that are professional. All right, so this is a book report style summary for He Loves Her Not. And this is all made up, but it's based on things that I've seen people do. I would love somebody else to read, but I will definitely do it if nobody wants to actually orate this.
Oh, you know I'm here if you want to.
Go for it, Sean.
All right. Writing a book report. He Loves Her Not is a book about Anne Marie Margolio, a school teacher who wakes up one day to find gravity has failed, and everyone who goes outside slowly floats off towards the sun. Her daughter, the son apparently still has gravity. Anyway, her daughter, Coralie, age 8, calls her and tells her she's all alone at her ex-husband's house. Anne Marie, through trials and tribulations, figured out how to tie herself to a car, which apparently has enough gravity, and rides with neighbor Mr. Pennyworth. Their sojourn is disrupted by looters who kill Mr. Pennyworth, tie Annie Marie to his body, weird question mark. I'm sorry, weird comma. And threaten to float them both away if she doesn't agree to become their mother. Anne Marie figures out how to cook when she can't stand on her own 2 feet and teams learns the de- that learns the developments are caused by a military scheme gone wrong. Using her wits, she finds a perfectly weighted breeze block to chain herself and Mr. Pennyworth's body so she's still holding the body, so she can replicate gravity and escapes the looters. She drives her car, but it suddenly dies and finds a field near her ex-husband's house with thousands of bodies, indicating something has changed gravity back, but only after the person has died. Armed with only a breeze block, Anne Marie fights against wildlife, floods, and on her mission to find her child. Can she do it in time? Comma, or else? This book is about the struggles of parenthood, rural life, and how one phone call can change everything. It's for anyone who has ever struggled through life and revolutionized their self-manifestation using the philosophy of Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Anybody want to read this book?
Ah.
Has anybody felt inclined to write something like this because they didn't know what else to write? That's the hard part. That is the really hard part because it is how are you supposed to summarize your book without summarizing your book? And unfortunately, that's what the blurb really is you are not truly summarizing your blurb. You are creating a sales pitch. So one of the easiest ways to do it, not necessarily the most creative way, is to essentially make your elevator pitch and expand it out. So you want to identify your protagonist, what kind of person they are, male, female, age, social status, the job that they do, trauma they've had in their background, disability, like things that actually describe your protagonist that makes them appealing to your target audience. So, if I was wanting to read a book, I might want to read a book about I don't know. I want to read about bankers. I'm reading a lot about banking, and so it'd be really cool to learn about a banker. But if the characters like banking doesn't have anything to do with it, and if you're writing a romance, and the big thing is that this person has been wronged before, you may not focus that they're a banker on the blurb. You might focus in that they're a professional businesswoman who's been wronged by her ex, right? Like so that's the kind of thing that she would look at is like what will actually endear this character to the reader, even if that character is incredibly complex. What is the one word or the one sentence trait about that character that will endear them to the reader? And then you want to focus on the story central conflict. We have tons of subplots in our stories, but generally speaking, when you first start creating your summary, just focus on that very big one that goes through the beginning to the end. Because everything else can make the point you're making to them, please buy this book to learn about this story, confusing. You want to include an inherent question. And essentially, it's the question of like, what'll happen if they fail, right? That is generally the easiest question to answer. What'll happen if they fail? And then show it is specific and original to your premise, right? This is not the same thing as like doing comps where it's like Star Wars, but everybody's made of Laffy Taffy, right? Like it'll be something more along the lines of, I am telling this story from, a person who is a divorcee instead of where we normally see like the young, beautiful heroine. This is a 40-year-old woman. Or, I'm telling this from the story of a Marine with PTSD, but it's a love story. We don't normally see that kind of protagonist, in primary like traditional fiction. So you're kind of saying what makes this a spin. And then once you have like that one or two sentence like setting, expand it, like add more risks for losing. Kind of talk about the undeserved misfortune, that occurred at the very beginning, or, things that make stuff harder in the middle. You have a little bit of room to play, but then also use intrigue. Add things that are like, oh, there's a mystery here. Oh, to figure out what this means, you gotta buy the book. So this isn't the only way to write a blurb, and I'm not saying you must do this exact thing, but if you are having a hard time writing a blurb that is actually engaging, that people read and they're like, oh yeah, I want to write that book or read that book. This is the easiest way to pull yourself away from that summary style and like get something that does have some allure, even if it, maybe doesn't show the entirety of what your book is about. So, Sean, you want to read this rewrite?
Right. Anne Marie always knew her husband would fail their daughter. Anne Marie is a ninth grade biology teacher struggling to co-parent her daughter Coraline with her cheating ex Todd after a contentious divorce. When she wakes up one day and gravity is changed across the people,
Oh, I screwed that one up.
changed
Okay, just
across
keep
the
going like this, right?
globe, people lift off the ground, screaming for help as they slowly disappear into the clouds, only to crash in flames back down to Earth. When the military commands everyone to stay inside, Anne Marie is happy to oblige. There's just one problem. Coraline is on Todd's farm far away. He left and never came back. And there's no food in the house. The last thing Anne Marie hears before her phone goes dead is her 8-year-old daughter asking for permission to pick an apple off the tree outside. No, no. Can Anne Marie survive long enough to get to her daughter? Can she become the protector and provider Coraline needs her to be? Or will they both float away? Much more hooky. Nice.
So, this still may not be a book you would read, and that's totally cool. But um, you're probably going to find a lot more readers who are like, okay, there's an intrigue. She always knew her husband would fail. Now we know who she is. Okay, this is cool for middle-aged women, feminist, anybody who's gone through a divorce and has a shithead ex. And then we also know that this is a family story. We know the issue, like better. We better understand. It's only people, and something happens when they get to a certain point, and they go up in the clouds, and then their bodies fall dead to the earth in flames. All right, this is like the actual circumstance they're fighting against, and then we have actual like emotional hooks, like you said. Like, we're worried about this little girl, she's all by herself and she's hungry, so we kind of have a ticking time. Like, we've got a clock, right? And if if mom doesn't go, kiddo's gonna die. So this is like plight. And so it's not just like, oh, there's something in the way. It's like, no, these are actual risks. And then we have the questions. We have a couple of big ones. Can she survive? Dad's not the protector and provider. That's very, male versus female coding right there. So can she be mom and dad? Or are they both going to die? So, like, you've got a number of different hooky things here. Even though it tells you a whole lot less about the story, it's more likely to get the intention of the reader. All right. So then we're going to talk about metadata and detail mistakes. Um, There are there are visible and invisible mistakes, and we can go into more detail if we were like SEO type people, but we're not. So I'm not going to bother you with that. So let's talk about the visible mistakes you can make and then the invisible mistakes. So one of the biggest issues that I see people who especially are new making as far as their mistakes go is they put their books in the wrong category. Um, People either will go too broad or they'll try to find niches and the book doesn't actually go. You can put your book in up to 3 categories, and Amazon, based upon who's buying your book and what other books they buy, has like, they're not secret categories, but they're categories you can't personally put your book in. they will put your book in other categories too for marketing purposes. It benefits them for books to sell. So in a lot of ways, like Amazon does want your book to sell. But if you're not, creating enough information to actually catch their algorithms, then it can't do that work. As much as I dislike a lot of their things, selling books is in their best interest. And so they, in a lot of ways, do want this system to function. Does it? No. Do they want it to? Yes. Are there systems in place for it to try? Yeah. So you need to do your market research and make sure that you're putting your book in niches that actually sell. There was this like really funny thing people used to do about 10 years ago where in order to get their book listed as a bestseller in a category, they would like do two categories that made sense. And then they would do one category where nothing sells. So they would get data from, there's a couple of different places where you can find data on like what genres sell and which don't, but they might be writing a book about a florist falling in love with a ghost, and they would put it in like paranormal romance, fantasy, gardening how-tos. And so they could become the number one bestseller in gardening how-tos because nobody was buying those books. You could sell 20 books and you're in the bestseller. You're like the number one bestseller in that category. So a lot of people were doing that so they could use that term number one bestseller. And Amazon really cracked down on that. So point I'm making is that if you've heard the terrible advice to like put your books in small niches, even if it doesn't quite fit, don't do that. Like they actually penalize you for that now. And then even if you're not sure where it goes, it's probably better to focus on the big categories first. You want to make sure if you're writing a sci-fi book that sci-fi book goes into sci-fi. You don't necessarily want to put your book into something where it doesn't fit and then there's no other data like about your book on the back end that says, well, wait a minute, like this is actually a story about, going on a space adventure. If you have made mistakes and like been like, oh, well, there's medical stuff in here, and there's also people coming back from the dead or whatever, and accidentally put your book and a bunch of things where you have like one or two elements of that, but don't actually encapsulate what the story is, and that can be hard to believe, like not believe, hard to comprehend. Figure out what markets actually sell before you put your book in one. And then again, try not to use like one or two elements of that story to define that story if it doesn't make sense to you. So in my example, it's like you're writing a zombie apocalypse story, but there's a scientist looking for an antidote to whatever the infection is. And so you're like, well, it's a thriller and it's medical. Like nobody is going to go look through medical thrillers trying to find the zombie apocalypse book. So you've actually told Big Giant Zon to put your book in a place where nobody's going to want to read it. So yes, avoid putting in the wrong category. All right. So the other thing happens is that there's always going to be pits and stagnation. I'm not saying break something when it's already working, but if you start seeing that your listing isn't sell or that book isn't selling as much, and you're already noticing a downtrend, it might be a good time to update it. You don't want to update your listing if it's working because that can mess with the algorithms. But if it's starting to dip, do you have new information about the book? Do you have awards? Do you have new like Kirkus reviews that you didn't have when you first like listed the story? Have you written prequels or sequels or other things that can go into the copy material like below your summary? um, and then like are there other books that you've written that are successful? Maybe this one particular book didn't sell the best, but then your next book sold really well and you're like a New York Times bestseller. Well, then go change what you say about yourself, in that summary, like by best selling, blah, 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 because that'll help like increase the appeal. But if you just leave things alone and you never update them, then they don't have a chance to say, like, if somebody is just perusing from your other works, get the same attention they might deserve. All right. So the other thing that I want to point out is if you look over here, and I don't mind messing with Ian Wright because he's very successful, but somebody on his team screwed this one up. And I do see that a lot of people who are making their listing for the first time, they mess this up too, because you think you have to fill out every single bubble and you have to like mark everything they ask you for. And they don't realize that the reading age question can be left alone. And that if you are not writing books for kids, you are supposed to leave it alone. So you accidentally end up saying that your book is for like older children, in the 14, 15 to 17-year-old category. But this book is not for kids. And this will screw up your algorithm stuff too. If you're presenting information that says this is for children and your book is not for children, Amazon won't tell you you messed up. They will just simply stop showing yours as also bots. It'll stop showing your story as like relevant to other books in your genre because it's getting ignored because it's being told that it's for kids, or because they've accidentally put this next to other YA stuff and it's not YA and it gets ignored there. So be very careful if you have produced books and you remember this question about reading age. Go back in, go to the drop down menu, and then reposition it so it's blank. The reading age thing will disappear and it'll be completely for adults. Even if you put your book in a YA genre, and there's a lot of YA genres for science fiction and fantasy, um, you do not have to put this reading age thing in. And it's probably preferential if you don't, if it's YA or YA like or new adult, but probably isn't appropriate for 14-year-olds. You're doing yourself a favor by getting rid of this. All right, so I feel like I'm missing something. Apologies. You go backwards. Nope, I guess not. Okay, Author Central. If you have never heard of Author Central, this is where KDP and Amazon have you put your bio information. And a lot of new authors don't know to create their Author Central profile. This is a bio, but it is a bunch of other things. So your bio is a way for you to show your authority in a subject if you're writing nonfiction, especially, and you are a subject matter expert. But also, like, if you have the lived experience, like if you're writing about nurses and you happen to be a nurse, or if you're writing about art, and you know you're doing what you know, right? This is great. You can also use this as a space to show a little bit more of your personality or your writing style, and also like maybe why you know things that other people don't know, right? And then if you're endearing, you're like, I love my cats, I love my dogs, I love my Starbucks, come read my books. But you can also add more visual information in your photo. You don't actually have to use a photo, but you can use like a brand, or you can use a cartoony kind of thing. It's just another way to endear yourself to a potential reader. um the other thing that Author Central lets you do is it lets you link all your books together. If you don't do this, like if you don't create your Author Central bio and link your books, when somebody clicks on the book that they already liked by you and searches your name, it'll go to a basic search engine for your name. And if somebody else has a similar name to you, or if somebody else has the same name as you, then it's just a listing of things, right? Like it's like going to Google and putting your name in, like anything could come up. So linking all this together means if somebody clicks on your name, boom, there's all of your books. This is like the picture of you. This is some funny stuff. This allows them to follow you so that Amazon will tell them when your new stuff comes out. So it allows you to not only sell the current book, previous books, and your next books. And this is one of the things that I'm seeing more and more that people don't do because it's relatively new and they didn't like update older books or old listings to like grandfather them in. All right, so to get you into like a better understanding of what this looks like on the front end, like your back end stuff will be very different. But when somebody looks at your Author Central bio, they're going to see the photo, they're going to see your actual bio. This dude's just totally about like, buy my book. If you're doing pre-orders or you have new releases, they will generally show up right here. Your highest selling books. So like, hey, if you like that, you'll love these kind of things. It'll show your whole collection another spot, and then it'll allow you to follow the author. If you pop open the bio, you can actually have a much larger section of bio, a better picture. So if you really like the look at this guy, you might read his books. But other people, like I said, like if a lot of romance authors that have multiple, pen names, they just use like graphics that kind of represent them. And then you can do little things where it's like, oh, we pretend somebody interviewed you and this is what you think of your own book selection. If you only have one book, it's not a big deal. But if you've got like 3 or 4, if you're writing a series, telling people where to start is helpful. And then lastly, if you are one of those big deal kind of people who likes to put their books in all sorts of different markets, you can like search in the all books for different formats or categories, or the general things by like publication date, high sellers, and that kind of stuff. But if you don't go in there and create that bio instead of Author Central, none of this is linked to your books, and it's harder to find. All right, this one I might go a little bit fast through. But there's something called A plus content, and it falls. If you ever scroll through a listing and you see the from the publisher section, that's where this comes from. Unfortunately, KDP's like, sorry, Amazon only allows this for KDP or trad authors, and that sucks. And what that basically means is either you have to have your book in Kindle Unlimited or your book has to be in the KDP print on demand scheme for you to be able to use this. But A plus content is essentially text, slides, graphics that increase visibility and appeals on your sales page. It includes like your traditional reviews. So Anna, when you're talking about reviews, if you're an independent author, they only want you to go up to 4. If you look at somebody's page and they are like a trad publisher, the trad publishers get a lot more. So I'm going to show you some people's pages that actually use this in a few minutes, and you'll see like you can tell who the trad published authors are because they have so many reviews. You can do a lot more expanded author bios. You can put in graphics. You can put in quotes from the book. You can put in a bunch of visual arts. And then I got this bottom one wrong. I think promo videos are coming up, but their promo videos are not currently part of it. All right, so I'm going to pause my share and then I will pop open one of these.
Pop open the chat that is full of stuff.
It's full of stuff. Wow. No, I was going to show pictures, but are there any relevant questions?
Statements a lot. Saying find the author page tools. Once you've created it is nearly impossible. I don't know where they hide it. Rhonda replying with, I deleted my KDP page before they started that practice. I just don't have that kind of energy. I put up there,
Sorry,
make sure to
guys.
Google your own name before you publish to make sure you should use it. Some people have way more SEO than you, and it would be impossible to overcome that. My name, Sean Carroll, is actually the same name as one of the guys who invented the internet. CC says, I need an assistant for most of this. Absolutely. Rhonda agreeing as well. And Rhonda as well, question about cross-genre books. Where can I find this all-knowing beta reader who suggests target audiences or genre dominance? And
I
sorry to
don't
get
know
to
where.
all of them.
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, this is frustrating. I cannot say, I can't tell you that it's not frustrating.
mhm.
um, so the author bio is in Author Central that I can tell you. And I believe this section over here is too, but a lot of stuff will like if you go to the little tab for marketing shows up here, even though you wouldn't think of this as marketing because you think marketing is advertisement. And so a lot of these things are in that marketing section, even though that doesn't like organically feel like it should be.
Yeah.
So sorry about that. Okay, so I really like if you are interested in doing stuff, I would definitely go look at Mandy Lynn Bell. This is one of her fiction books, but she actually gives a lot of content on YouTube on how to use the A plus or the from the publisher content. So like for her, it's like, hey, I'm going to tell you more about my book. Like, are you interested in backpacking? Do you want a fish out of water story? Do you want opposites attracts or the guy falls first and summer fling? Like these are things that people look for specifically for romance. So she's like telling you this is what the content of my story is without getting too specific. So if you like these things, you'll like her book, is basically what she's saying. And it's a graphic and it's cute and it's visually interesting. And then she's saying, hey, here's another graphic that tells you which book is which in the series. And that's cool. And then she's like, well, wait a minute, you also could read this other book first, and this is why. So she's using, these graphics really, even though they've got a lot of text content to make more arguments for buying her book, or if this is really not your cup of tea, please don't buy my book and give me a shitty review. So I'm trying to open up the next one. Can you see this by chance? Somebody can build a nest in, or did that not pop open?
Yes, it's very tiny, but it's working.
It
I'm
should
sorry,
not
I
be
just
tiny.
mean on my screen.
Okay, let me stop share and then reshare. Apologies. I might have to do this for everyone. Okay, does that look better?
You're good. You're good.
Okay. So this one is traditionally published and they can do a lot more. This is a bunch of different kinds of layouts for your A plus content. This is actually somebody's quote about the book. This is a review. This is another author who has reviewed this book. And then we have some more quotes and authors and some more graphic stuff that looks very much like the cover. And then you get down here and there's like a bazillion editorial reviews, which unfortunately, if you are not part of like a trad publisher, you're limited to four. So be very careful. And then you've got your about the author over here. So popping back over another one. All right, so how to become a Dark Lord and die trying is very similar, where you have a bunch of like, I have a bunch of quotes, or I've got a bunch of other authors who love this book, and a bunch of visual things that are super interesting, and 7 billion reviews. The other thing they have over here is highlights. These are quotations from the story that get populated here because other people have highlighted them in the story. So basically, the reader has the ability to highlight your text when they have that book, if they've got the Kindle version of it. And so this will automatically populate because somebody has highlighted that section enough to become like a big deal. So this is supposed to be representative of your writing style or things that are evocative in there that's like essentially crowdsourced. So that's another one of those things that the A plus content can allow you to do. I don't know if this is actually helpful. Switching over to the very first one. But anyway, so this is a dark romance, and they also have quotes. This is a person who has done this independently. Like this is not a traditionally published book, but you can see how they're doing the same thing where the people are highlighting, you've got the quotes, and then they've created this sort of like multi-graphic but like cohesive picture on your screen with that one graphic. And so they're including reviews. They're putting they're putting like this blurby kind of salesy thing that's supposed to be evocative of the story, and like boom, please buy this thing. And then as you see, because they are by themselves, they have no editorial reviews. And then I got one more. It's another romance, but oh my goodness, sorry guys. Go down. So you have more of the highlights. You've got more quotes. And this one does the same kind of thing that that first one did, where it's like, hey, this is fake marriage and enemies to lovers, women in power, and then high stakes intrigue and dark mysterious magic. And it's an addictive series. There's more than one. And then how fast is this romance? It's slow and steamy. So it takes a while to get there, but it's going to be hot. So, like, there's a lot of different things that one could use. This is another independent author, and so they only have a few reviews. So you can see the difference, but it's still valuable to have like actual reviews there so that you've got all of this, like, I don't like to use the word authority, but that's really what it is called. Proving the value of your story and like trying to stop people from deciding not to buy your book. So after all of that, I think like I've got like 3 minutes for questions, if anybody has any. Oh my goodness, were you guys not able to see my screen?
No, I can see it.
Okay. I just realized that might not be it. Okay, so yeah, I am trying to unshare that and go back over here. But yeah, it's a lot. I would not be mad at you if you're like, I still don't understand a whole bunch of this, but that was unfortunately kind of the point is that there's so much to do and there's a lot of either conflicting information or outdated information, or it's just hard to know what the terms are. You need to search to learn about stuff. And unfortunately, not knowing can bite you in the butt when it comes to actually getting new readers. And so, just one way we would like to help you be able to reach out to your audience and, share your wonderful stories with them. All right, Sean, for those that
Yeah.
weren't here when we first got started,
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
people what we will be doing next week.
Awesome. Next week are going to do bookseller AMAs with three local Houston booksellers, and that's going to be a part of Writers Family Reunion, a bunch of events that are happening the first weekend in May. And it's a bunch of things. Tomeworks is going to be involved in playing writerly games on Friday night at where was it at? Axelrad. And there are several other things. That we'll be doing all over town. I'm gonna toss a link on in here. I basically I bookseller AMA. Bring your questions next Thursday for writers lunch. And what would you like to know from booksellers? What works? What doesn't work? What do they see happen on the shelves? And how did they end up being booksellers, which is always a lovely question as well.
I think there are going to be a lot of people interested to know how they decide what goes on their shelves and how.
Possible. That might be above the pay grade for, well, actually, just one of them. Two of them do have so it's a one bookseller who has worked at two local different shops, but it's mostly always been front of house. I Another one who has worked her way up at Brazos bookstore from working in the front to being in charge of receiving. And the third one, from Class Bookstore, a small independent bookstore that does a lot of pop-ups and stuff. And yeah, him and his wife decide anything they want to carry. So very strict controls on that. In order to kind of get a deeper dive into that, there is going to be a Right Space class towards the end of June with the book buyer from Brazos Bookstore if you want to know really in depth how to get your book into bookstores. And really the short answer is either be traditionally published and have somebody else handle it, or make friends. Bring them brownies, bring them cookies, be nice, buy their books, and be friends, and that's the best way to get somewhere with an independent bookstore.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions kind of like that, but for them. So I'm excited. I will get that listing up this afternoon. But I hope everybody here has learned something that you can take towards, either publishing your book or helping somebody else if you're not doing the self-publishing route. But yeah, have a great day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.